Passive perception is one of the dumbest things in Dungeons and Dragons. Now, before I lose half of you guys on this, 2,000 people took this poll, and half of you believe it's awesome and half of you think it's dumb. In fact, actually, it's slanted a little bit towards awesome. That's why I say it's a hot take, but the idea of passive perception is good, but the way it is implemented, used, and viewed by the large part of the community is dumb. And no, I'm not calling you dumb. I think the mechanic itself is just used incorrectly and can lead to some bad game mechanics. So right now I'm going to do what the rules is written do not do and give you examples of when to use and when not to use passive perception and all types of passive scores. I want to once and for all solve this passive perception predicament of having all these people being so literally divided in the middle of how you should use it or if it's even good or not. But these are my opinions of this whole thing, and I would love to hear what your opinions are after watching this video down in the comments. All right, so we're going to start off with what passive perception is not. It is not a replacement for an actual skill check. And second, it is not a skill floor that you can just never roll lower than. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions about passive perception is it becomes some sort of reliable talent feature that the rogues get where you just can never roll below 10. Because applying that concept of passive perception and then therefore all passive scores is definitely not what was intended at all, because then reliable talent would just be useless. And I think a lot of the confusion on this comes from a tweet from Jeremy Crawford, who I would love to see. If I hear from Jeremy Crawford about this video, I would love to see an answer of what he thinks about this video and the stance on passive perception to clear it up a little bit. But this was said, passive perception is an option that a DM can choose to use or not. And if you do use it, perception checks are typically made, like normal perception checks, are typically made only when a character is actively searching for something. And normally they're searching because their passive perception failed to notice something. This has been one thing that people have used for the argument of, oh, if I am looking for a trap or something and the DC is 15, well, my passive perception is higher than 15, so I see the trap. No. We're going to get into this now because this gets me a little fired up, but let's break down some points. First, from a mechanical perspective, at level 1, you can have a passive perception of 18 with expertise in perception. And it only gets crazier as you level and your proficiency bonus gets higher. You have access to other feats and other type of stuff. You can have multiple people, in talking and researching for this, have had passive perceptions of 30 or more. And in my own campaign of 3 years, I had one of my wizard rogue multi-class characters have a passive perception of 32. And if you treat this as a skill floor or a replacement for checks of some kind, and those two things go together, because if you're able to replace a score with your passive score, then that is technically your skill floor. And that means you can't roll lower than a 32 or whatever your passive score is. That's just very disheartening for everyone around. What's the point of perception checks anymore? What's the point of looking for anything anymore? There's one player that has got it all. Now, should that player be the most observant one in the group and notice things and notice next level things and sometimes save the group from their observations? Yes, for sure. We'll get into the good stuff later. Now, this one right here is my biggest point of the whole thing and the thing that gets me fired up the most out of all of this. And yes, the dungeon coach is going to use a sports analogy for this to get this across. But free throw shooting in basketball. Every NBA player, college player, whoever has a free throw shooting percentage that is their average free throw shooting score. Some are really high. Some people have a 90+% free. They're professionals at doing this. That makes sense. They're super good at doing this thing. But nobody is perfect in a fantasy setting or in real life. And if someone has a 99% free throw shooting percentage, even 100, they've never missed a shot all season. They could have a night where they miss 2 in a row, 3 in a row. They could have a night where they miss 1. Maybe you got fouled really hard just before that. Maybe you just got hit in the head. Maybe a goblin stabbed you in the stomach, and maybe you're less perceptive because you're bleeding. Accidentally segued from basketball over to D&D, but you get the point. Is none of these characters at your table are perfect at what they do. Skill floors, in general, I don't really even like the reliable talent feature. I just think that takes a key rolling factor out of the game. But the big picture is nobody is perfect. I don't care how high your passive perception score is. If you walk into a dungeon with traps there that you've never seen before, you've never seen how these ones work, you've never seen this type of trap setup, you would not just passively be alerted to it. Your character might be distracted by all the stuff going on in their mind about what's going on with their backstory, what's going on with the plot, what's going on back home. They just got stabbed by that goblin. So yes, that character still would be pretty perceptive in general about what's going on around them, but when it comes time for the dungeon master to see if anyone notices something and they're in that spot, ask for the check. And that roll represents that exact moment of that exact time when they could possibly notice that trap and see if they do or not. And even having to defend that moment and say that sounds weird, but I'll get into the good things about passive perception, how it should be used here in a second. Because the big final thing here on the cons list is passive scores for everything, because it's not just passive perception. There's passive insight to see how well you are at kind of discerning people's reading their body language and stuff. Passive athletics, passive acrobatics. A passive stealth score of how generally stealthy you are. All of these things are good unless you apply all of the bad things I just said of what people do with passive perception. Because if people that treat passive perception the way they do apply that to all other skills, the game becomes dumb. And you have attack rolls, passive attack rolls. That sounds great. Passive athletics checks, passive. Everyone's passive score, they just start checking their passive scores and just saying they don't have to roll for stuff, which then creates a really weird vibe and power balance at the table that's just not healthy or good. One of the comments on YouTube from Zack is talking about wanting examples like passive animal handling and how animals react to you when you're around them. That totally makes sense that someone with a very high animal handling score would passively just be very good with animals. Yes, but they would not have some sort of passive animal handling to just hand wave lots of things when a DM asks them for a check for it. Because maybe they're interacting with an animal that they've never seen before, don't know how it works, they don't have any sort of knowledge basis of it. Ooh, so there's all of the bad stuff that gets me fired up about passive perception, how it's used and how it can break the parts of the game. But I want to now talk about the good things of passive perception, because in general, I want to be careful when I say this, but I do use or think of passive perception, but I do not implement it like any of the ways I just said. Timeout. Real quick, giving you a heads up here just in case your passive perception wasn't high enough. See what I did there? I got 2 big updates coming and they both happen to be dropping around the same time. I got a bunch of really cool big announcements to make about the channel and Patreon and a lot of different stuff that I'm going to be able to do over the summer and beyond and stuff. So stay tuned for that. And Alcanner's Almanac is about a month away from being done. This is crazy. It's about to be released, PDF version, and then all the hardcovers start to get printed off and stuff. But there's only about a month or 2 left before the hardcovers are not going to be sold anymore, and the door closes on that because I'm only printing them once. So if you do want the hardcover, there's a pre-order link down below. And if you do want Alcanner's Almanac in PDF version, it'll be available on my website. Go down below to the website and you can sign up for the newsletter and you'll get alerted right when it comes out, and some cool coupons. All right, let's get back to it. How should you use passive perception? Here is my general approach. I'm going to get into a bunch of different parts and different intricacies about it, but in general, how I view and use passive perception and all passive scores, because I view them and use them the exact same, is this. I want to know my player's passive score, and that score represents that character's general ability to do that thing. And that's it. That's as far as it goes. It is a good reference point and gauge for myself as a dungeon master to be able to see how good they are at that thing. And yes, there are some times that I actually use that number as a DC or use that number as some sort of benchmark or checkpoint or something, but we'll get into that in a second, because I think this is the key way that how dungeon masters should use this thing so that it doesn't corrupt players or players get some sort of entitled reason that, oh, that's my score, I can't roll lower than that, and all that kind of misunderstanding stuff. So that character with a 32 passive perception, I just know as a dungeon master, damn, that guy's perceptive as hell. And I'm going to probably say, if there's something that the group notices or something that I want to tell the group as some sort of narrative ploy, or I want to be able to tell a plot point, or you notice something, I'm probably going to go to that player to do it. Now be careful not to overgo to that one character only, and the only thing that person that ever notices anything is that one player. I would definitely pay attention to who has the second highest passive perception, and so on. And if it's something having to do with a person's backstory, like they're in their own town and they look down an alley and they notice someone from their back, tell that to the person that's backstory. Don't just be like, oh, well, sorry, they have the highest passive perception, so they get all the cool information about perception. Just use it as a guide and flavor to, as a dungeon master, to know your players, which is why ultimately I don't also think that you need it, because I know my players well enough. Great example is right now in my homebrew campaign, I have 4 players. The Artificer Ranger has the highest perception by far. I don't know right now, and maybe it's on the back of my Dungeon Master screen, but I don't know what their passive perception score is. I just don't. And I just know they're the most perceptive. So probably whenever they notice something, it's going to be her that notices it. Cool. And I also know the least perceptive person is the fighter. They have some really interesting backstory stuff of why they have a bad perception, but they have really bad. And the other 2 are pretty even. So the passive scores don't need to tell me that. I just know that based on the characters and maybe their backstory, the mechanics they have, the stats they have, whatever. You as a dungeon master know your players well enough to do that. Now, if you're just starting a game and you want to know that stuff, that is good to kind of look at their scores and stats to know about how good they are at stuff. To now transition this example to another passive score like acrobatics or something. If your group is about to have to walk across a thin balance beam of some kind, and there's a rogue in the group that has expertise and proficiency, etc. in acrobatics, that rogue is just going to go across. I'm not even going to ask him for a check. Am I using passive perception to replace that? No. That's not what the process in my head is. I've never replaced it as it. But with the information that I know of how passively good they are at something, because I know the character well enough, whether that's mechanically knowing it or the expertise or whatever, I just know that character's super good at that thing. I don't even make them make a roll for it. They just go across. Props for you for having that type of character. Great. They feel cool about it. Very cool. Because as a dungeon master, if I ever don't have people roll for something, that's almost like a power move. That's like a props to that player. Oh, wow, he's so good, didn't have to roll for it. Wow, because I take it so seriously like that. You see what I'm saying? And the other groups, the rest of the group is going to have to make those checks going across. Or maybe passive strength. The barbarian in the group trying to lift a huge table just lifts the table. Now, if they want to start lifting it super high and throw it really far, sure, then maybe we're getting a little farther. Now I need an athletics check or a strength check or something for that. Sure. But if the little tiny gnome of the group, the gnome wizard, wants to lift a huge table that's 8 times bigger than them, okay, I'm going to need a check. Or maybe it's so big and they're so weak that I don't even ask them for a check because it's impossible. I'm going to have a video soon on natural 1 and natural 20s and that whole thing, and that might be another hot take. Okay, now that I got that off my chest, I'm going to go through some different examples and different comments from you guys of ways to use passive perception and how you can use it to increase the quality of your games, the fun of your games, immersion, all that stuff. So first up is to use this thing as a plot device, as an acceleration of your plot. Kind of like I said earlier, let people know if they have a passive insight, a passive perception, whatever the thing is, give the information out to people. So if someone has a passive perception and you're in a town and there's a plot hook you want to give about a sketchy figure with a robed hood on that's doing some sort of sketchy exchange, and that's a little plot hook you want to say, throw it to the person with the highest passive perception. You'd say, as you walk out of the tavern, you look across down the street and you notice some sketchy things going on that definitely rub you the wrong way. And as you make eye contact with this person, they dart off. There you go. You use passive perception to target the person at the table with the highest passive perception to just flavor who saw it. Now, maybe the person with the second highest passive perception has a history with this group, with this, let's just say they have green hoods, some sort of insignia, and they have a backstory thing with them, and they're the one that notices it. Cool. Don't let passive perception scores trump what would make more sense from a story or a character perspective. And the next one here, I probably should have said first, but it can help speed up gameplay. Passive perception. I did this so bad as a dungeon master when I first started dungeon mastering. All right, everybody make a perception check. Everybody make a perception check. I would do that too much of these massive group checks, and I'm like wanting to tell them something, and I'm like, all right, everybody roll, and then like, you notice, like, you don't have to do that. You don't have to do that. You can just have it be told, like I just said, and explain the next part of what you want to tell them. Maybe the person with the highest passive perception notices the big important thing, and the other people in the group also notice another figure this way. Next way I use passive perception is as a baseline set of what information I'm going to give them. If everyone's passive scores are terrible, or that one person with the high passive score isn't there for whatever reason, they're shopping or doing whatever, and it's just this group compared to if they were there, I have that be some sort of base threshold of what type of stuff I would say, and then I ask for the perception check. Me and Travis Coe down from the comments are 100% synced up on this. He said, instead, if I am asking for a roll, the PCs are going to get some information, and their roll versus the DC is going to get additional detail. I do the same thing. I have some amount of information that I'm going to tell them. The base normal person, that anyone, you would notice there's a building there. You would notice there's a thing right in front of you. I'm not gonna, you don't just roll a natural 1 and just go blind or something like that, right? There's a baseline of information, and that roll they make is just a flavor bonus to see if they add even more to it. So I am paying respects to that passive perception and what I'm telling them, but then that roll adds on top of it. Think of it like this. If I have this much information to give right here, and the person with a super high perception, 32 passive perception, I'm gonna respect that, and I'm gonna give them at least half the information just flat out right now, like you just know it. Now I'm going to ask for a perception check from them or maybe someone else in the group, and depending on how that goes is how much more they get. Natural 20, I'm telling you everything. Natural 1, wow, okay, I'll tell you this much. Or maybe as a joking flavor thing, I'll tell them this much, because I love me some natural 1s. But next thing, we're going to go to a comment again from Robert Rich. I rule that passive perception is like a spidey sense. I love that. It gives the player a vague feeling that something's wrong, but then they have to actively roll perception and investigate what it is. This is a great segue towards traps and stuff, and how passive perception so much gets brought up in relation to when it comes to traps. The character I mentioned for my previous homebrew campaign of a multi-class wizard rogue had a background of dungeon delver. They had the feat dungeon delver. They knew all about traps, right? But they would literally break my game if they had traps and they could just find them all the time. Now I can't throw traps at my players. That feels bad. That player, I even talked to that player specifically and be like, look, so, and we had this exact conversation and they're like, no, I don't want you to ruin traps. Like that's not even what the player wants. You know what I'm saying? So here's how I ran traps for 3 years for this group and it felt great. And we're going to add Robert Rich's Spidey Sense concept into this whole thing. Is whenever I would create a dungeon, I'd create a whole thing, I'd lay it all out and I'd have this whole dungeon made. And there's like 2 traps in here that I really wanted to like, oh, these 2 big traps are gonna be awesome. For those traps, I would flesh out what type of things they are and what type of triggers and stuff they have. I have a whole video on traps. I have a whole PDF on traps. But once I had them nice and good in the spot, I'd pick the DCs for what it would be for being able to find or disarm and all that kind of stuff. I'd make them like normal. And then I would take a big step back and insert fake traps for that character to find. A lot of times these fake traps gave heads up or clues or information and heavily had to do with the theme, or maybe it was a trap that they got sprung on an enemy or something, or a trap that sprung and then they were able to learn something from the trap, like some sort of lore, because I knew that this character was just going to find it and be able to instantly disarm it because that's part of the character. That's part of his class fantasy and vision of what he sees his character being good at, is being able to walk up and dismantle a trap. So we both win. I can present things that just get automatically solved by his super awesome perception score and trap skills, and then I still get to run traps for them, and he has a really high plus to his traps anyway. So when they walk up to those 2 traps that I really did make fully, they can walk up and maybe he still rolls high enough to notice this, and then they get to try and dismantle. And that itself is just a base dungeon master skill of being able to set your players up for success in sometimes and set them up for challenges in other times. So in the same way, if you have a ranger whose favorite enemy are dragons, you should probably, as a dungeon master, put dragons into your campaign for them, right? In the same way here, I have these 2 traps that I'm keeping and running off as normal traps. I am not going to have, oh, your passive perception score of 32, you notice everything. Okay, here's how the trap works, you know what I'm saying? And a lot of times how I would narratively describe things as they move through was a Spidey Sense type of thing. As they're moving through, you start to notice stuff, and he would notice certain things that felt a little bit off or felt a little bit spaced differently, or you can tell this is not natural man-made anymore. Or it is man-made, but you just notice the grooves in this section are a little deeper. That was enough of a Spidey Sense to go off for him to go and explain what he's trying to do and then make a check for it. Which then also gets me into another concept of specifically calling for stuff. I think passive perception can lead to very lazy players and just like, I have a passive perception, okay, everything's fine. No. I tell my players, if you are specifically looking for a certain thing, the DC for that is going to be very low. If not, I just tell you. If they creatively ask, like one time I had a group of enemies following the players, and there was a 3 people following them. If anyone ever said, I want to keep looking behind to see if anybody's following us, if they ever even said that or mentioned it, I would tell them something, right? That's the respect for that baseline information I'm talking about that drops to 0, right? I'm just going to tell them because they're creative, they're thinking enough, they're active, they're engaged in the world. If they ask specifically for that, I'm just telling you. But I don't care how high your passive perception is. Maybe eventually the person with a really high passive perception, I might start throwing clues at that person that like, there's some weird odd things from behind, you know what I'm saying? I'd give them some clues for that, but I want players to be able to specifically look for something so that if they walk into a room and they want to evaluate it and they say, I want to look at the ceiling for something, and I have like a bunch of spiders up there or something that's going to come down on them, if they specifically say, I'm looking up there, I don't care what their perception score is, passive or active, that is going to be a lower DC, a lower number check than somebody walking in being like, what do I see? Sure, if you generally ask, what do you see? I'll give you the general stuff of what you see, but I'm not going to tell you my secrets to somebody following you or some spiders up there. Same thing applies towards insight checks and passive insight. If players ask specific questions, say certain things, they trigger the NPC in some way to get them to say something, that is going to mean more to me than what their insight check was or what their passive thing was. So as a dungeon master, you have to balance these 3 things. What's that character's passive score? How good are they? That gives you a really good sense of information of how good they are. That's great information for you as a dungeon master. Then what does that player say? Like with the person controlling that character, what do they say and do? Respect that. That's going to balance some things out. And then maybe you have a check for it, and that check might be needing to hit a certain DC, or that check might be just a flavor for what happens. And now what some of y'all have been waiting for of when to actually use the literal score in the game as some sort of number. So if you have a passive perception of 15, when do you use that 15? Sometimes if I'm trying to think of a DC for it or whatever, let's say it's 14, because 15 and 10, 15, 20 is a little bit more common number. So let's say the passive perception is 14, and I have an enemy, I'm about to make a stealth check, and they're gonna sneak up. It's that character has a passive perception of 14. It's their Night's Watch. I'm sneaking up into the group. Here we go. I'm gonna make a stealth check. I might have to beat a 14. Now, if that player says, like I just said a second ago, if they say, I really want to keep a watch or whatever, then cool. I'll have them make a perception check, and they would have a chance to be able to notice it like that. And hell, I might even have that be a skill floor of some kind, to where I know I'm about to sneak up into the group. This is an unideal situation for them. It can feel real bad if you just like sneak up and like backstab somebody at night. They feel very vulnerable like that. So maybe I have 14 as the number and I got to beat it, and they have a passive perception. They roll and they get like an 8 or something. Okay, fine, let's go. I'm now going to roll and see what happens. I roll stealth. It's higher than the 8 and higher than the 14. Sneak up, stab the character at night. Oh my gosh, this is crazy. I personally think that example is the grayest area I can try and show you guys of when I actually might use it as a skill floor substitute, because really that moment feels bad. If I use pure passive perception, they never rolled for it, and they just had a passive perception of 14, and then I just rolled a stealth check out of nowhere. The character did and said nothing, and then just gets shanked. That doesn't feel very good. So I wanted to give them a chance for it, but at the same time, I wanted to respect the character's passive perception on their night watch, because they are taking a night's watch, and in general, you would be somewhat observant. But that's the big thing, is I use it when I feel like it would help me adjudicate what I want to do as a dungeon master better, not some sort of pre-mandated thing that the players have ammo against me of like, oh, my passive perception score is this, I should have, like, whoa. I respect all of my characters' scores, stats, backstories, information, what they say, and I balance all of it for what that character would do in that moment. And if I ask for a check, it's either a check to see if something happens or not, or it's a check to flavor on top of that passive score. Honestly, please share this video out and around to your friends. Talk about it down in the comments. Talk about it with each other. I want to get this out there to be able to help other people get a better perception on what this passive perception and other passive scores can be. I did a lot of research and really tried to say as best as I possibly could this whole passive perception thing. I've been wanting to make this video for about a year now, but I really wanted to put everything I could into it to say it as best as I possibly could, to present the argument on both sides, and so we can all have a good idea of how to use it and help our games. Because I want, at the end of the day, I don't care how you use it as long as it makes your games better and you don't have any of these arguments or headbutts at the table or things feeling bad. Because if you and your group use passive perception in a certain way, props to you. Cool, that's awesome. But I'm just trying to spread the word of what's possible and what maybe other options are out there that might feel better at your table. There is some more I could say on passive perception and other points that I had written down, but I wanted to keep these ones as the top ones to be able to present this thing to you guys. Let me know if you like it by liking the video. Like I said, share it to other people. I really do appreciate that. And if you want to support what I do here even more, and stay tuned for those next level announcements I got coming real soon here in about 2 weeks, 1 week, I don't know. It's coming real soon. I'm super excited. Check out my Patreon, check out all the other stuff I got going on my website, and stay up to date with everything Outcanner's Almanac related, Dungeon Coach related. I got 2 other channel stuff. All the stuff's down in the description. I appreciate you guys, love you guys, and keep staying creative and thinking outside the box.